This very Southern governor from the deepest part of the Deep South was a great civil rights advocate. He appointed more African Americans, more women, more Hispanics to judgeships and senior positions than all 38 presidents before him put together. And his record internationally is remarkable. He put human rights at the center of his foreign policy and applied that to both the Soviet Union and to dictators in Latin America, getting thousands of prisoners free and creating the future of democracy in that region. He built up the U.S. defenses against the Soviet Union at a critical point with the cooperation, by the way, of the UK. They were right with him, both Callahan and Prime Minister Thatcher.
Now, King Charles has praised Jimmy Carter's devotion to promoting peace and human rights after his death at the age of 100. Carter received a Nobel Peace Prize for his humanitarian work after leaving the White House.
Most work of the Carter Center is in remote villages in the poorest nations in Africa. And there I have witnessed the capacity of destitute people to persevere under heartbreaking conditions. I have come to admire their judgment and wisdom, their courage and faith, and their awesome accomplishments when given a chance to use their innate abilities. But tragically, in the industrialized world, there's a terrible absence of understanding or concern about those who are enduring lives of despair and hopelessness.
Carter became president in 1977 and his first foreign visit was here in the UK. He went to Newcastle where he made an immediate impression.
Away the lads! I'm very grateful to be a Geordie now, and I'm deeply grateful at the tremendous welcome that you've extended to me and to the other visitors who've come here from the United States. I'm proud to be presented the freedoms of your community. I feel as though I'm one of you, and I will never forget the wonderful welcome that you have extended to me. Good luck to you. We share a great future together. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
During his one term in office, the former US president helped normalise relations between Egypt and Israel, but he couldn't secure re-election when he came up against Ronald Reagan. Andrew Buncombe interviewed Carter in 2004 for his book, The Hornet's Nest, and we can speak to him now. Hi, Andrew.
Hi there. Hey, Lara, how's it going? Nice to speak with you.
It's good, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I have read, for one, an account of your extraordinary conversation with Jimmy Carter. Can you just talk us through that interaction that you had with him?
Yeah, so like you say, it was 2004, and I'd flown down to Atlanta, Georgia, from DC to interview Carter about this book, which was one of maybe 30 that he wrote over the course of his lifetime. And we were told in advance that was all he wanted to talk about. And in truth, to the late former president, it was slightly heavy going. It was 460 pages long. And if I told you I didn't read all of it, I don't think you'd be surprised. However, we knew that perhaps we'd get him to talk about something else. Obviously, this was a year after the invasion of Iraq. There was controversy growing over that, not only with the sort of deaths there, but also the fact that Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction not been found. And so we tried to think about, okay, how can we approach this? And so we set off by I started off by asking him about this book, The War of Independence, and what lessons it had for the present day. And straight away he said, yes, of course, there are lessons that relate to now. And that's in the way we got talking about the need for allies, the need to build trust, the need to not get sidetracked. Our conversation progressed, and then we got on to the fact about, could war be avoided? Of course, Jimmy Carter, famously one of the few US presidents that never committed troops to action. And he said, look, most wars could be avoided, not all of them, but most. And he said, look, just last year, this invasion of Iraq by Bush and Blair was unnecessary. It was based on lies. And it was at that moment I thought, okay, I've got my story. And I was kind of hoping that he just didn't see me grin too loudly, because I knew that I knew we had our scoop for the next day's paper.
And do you think that he was aware when he said that to you of how much of a bombshell comment it was? Because I think you write in this piece that it's pretty unusual to see comments of that sort from a former president about, military operations of an incumbent.
Right. I mean, listen, in this, in today's political era, you see people and political rhetoric from the likes of Donald Trump that is really kind of, outrageous and critical and very shocking. Back then, it wasn't the sort of thing that people did, and that's what made it all more powerful. However, I don't think for a second that Jimmy Carter didn't know what was going on. He completely knew what he was saying. He completely knew he was saying it to a journalist, and that I would, print his comments. He wanted them out there. The idea that Jimmy Carter was being tricked or what have you, no, he was very sharp. He was charming. He was very attentive. He was very classy. He was like old school kind of charisma and humility, but not for one moment do I think he didn't know exactly what he was doing when, he said that.
It's fascinating. Well, thank you very much for recounting that to us. That was Andrew Buncombe, and journalist there, telling us about the time that he interviewed President Carter for his book, The Hornet's Nest. Now, I can now welcome Ambassador Stuart Eizenstadt, who was Jimmy Carter's domestic policy director throughout his term of office and has written a biography of his White House years. And he joins me now. Hi, Stuart.
Hello.
Hi. So, just what was he like to work with? Talk to us a bit about what he was like as a person to work with on a kind of daily basis.
Well, I worked with him as his policy director when he ran for governor, for president, and as chief domestic policy advisor in the White House. He was an exacting taskmaster. He had grown up in the nuclear Navy. He had a great disciplinarian in Admiral Rickover, and indeed in his father when he was a young kid. He would oftentimes return our memos with grammatical mistakes or split infinitives or misspellings because he expected everybody to do their very best. He was voracious in his reading. He made decisions in a very deliberate way, listening to all sides. He never jumped to conclusions. And unlike his reputation, which is that he was a great post-president, which he was, but that his presidency was not as great, that is wrong. We got 70% of our major legislation passed. We have energy security today because of his energy work. We have the Department of Education because of his belief in energy, all the ethics laws on the books, and he ran against Watergate. Today, go back to his time, he was a great environmentalist, double the size of our national parks. He deregulated all modes of transportation. Airlines, bring airline traffic to the middle class who couldn't afford it before, trucking, rail. The whole cable era is a result of his deregulation of telecommunications. And this very Southern governor from the deepest part of the Deep South was a great civil rights advocate. He appointed more African Americans, more women, more Hispanics to judgeships and senior positions than all 38 presidents before him put together. And his record internationally is remarkable. He put human rights at the center of his foreign policy and applied that to both the Soviet Union and to dictators in Latin America, getting thousands of prisoners free and creating the future of democracy in that region. He built up the U.S. defenses against the Soviet Union at a critical point with the cooperation, by the way, of the UK. They were right with him, both Callahan and Prime Minister Thatcher. All the weapon systems, which Ronald Reagan gets credit for applying against the Soviet Union, Carter, started. He normalized relations with China, and what was his greatest diplomatic achievement, one that's unequaled at any time in American history, is the negotiations at Camp David for peace between Egypt and Israel, who had fought 4 wars. And if I may tell you one anecdote, because it says so much about his attention to detail, but also his sensitivity. So he drafted 22 separate peace agreements in the 13 days and nights that he had Prime Minister Begin and Egyptian President Sadat there. And the 13th and last day, a Sunday, Prime Minister Begin comes to his cabinet, Camp David, and says, Mr. President, I've made all the compromises I can make. I won't do any more. Please give me a limousine to take me to Andrews Air Force Base. I've got an Al Al plane waiting to take me back. Well, President Carter realizes this would undercut Sadat's historic trip to Jerusalem and would leave him holding a failed negotiation. He remembered, because of the detailed attention he gave to the CIA profiles, that Begin had a great love for his grandchildren. So he gets his personal secretary to make 8 copies of the original photograph of the 3 leaders on day 1, inscribes it to each child of Begin's, each grandchild, by name, with wishes for peace, Jimmy Carter, walks it over to Begin's cabin, hands him the pictures. He sees Begin read aloud the names of each of those grandchildren. Begin's eyes begin to tear, his lips quiver. He puts his suitcase down and says, Mr. President, for my grandchildren, I'll make one last try.
Wow.
And that's what ended up making Camp David possible. It shows his attention to detail, but also his human sensitivity.
Just extraordinary. And I think one of the things I was keen to ask you is about that reputation, as you say, commonly held to be, the best ex-president, but perhaps not to have the best record of that single term in office. But actually, in the last few years, we have seen a few biographies that have sought to kind of correct the record on that. Why do you think it's taken so long to look differently?
Including my own, if I may say.
Including your own, we should definitely say. Why do you think it's taken so long to correct that public perception of him?
I think there are 2 reasons. One reason is that his post-presidency is so successful that it eclipses presidency. It lasted 10 times longer. His presidency was 44 years. His post-presidency was 4 decades. And he, in that post-presidency, with the Carter Center, cured 2 African diseases, guinea worm and river blindness. He monitored 100 elections. He built 4,000 homes with Rosalind and Habitat for Humanities. So that's one of the reasons. It simply overshadowed his 4 years. But the second, and this is really important, and I'm very honest in my biography, he lost overwhelmingly, despite these accomplishments, to Ronald Reagan for 3 reasons. And I call them the 3 I's. The first I is inter-party warfare in the Democratic Party. Senator Ted Kennedy ran to his left, said he wasn't liberal enough, divided the party, and never reconciled. The second I, inflation. And this, by the way, involved all the Western countries, including the UK. Very high inflation, largely because of the oil shock of the Iranian Revolution, which doubled oil prices, caused gas lines, and made people extremely angry. He had very little control over that, but an incumbent gets blamed for it. And to his credit, a courageous decision he made in the midst of this inflation rise, with an election pending, he appoints Paul Volcker to head the Federal Reserve, knowing, because Volcker told him, if you appoint me, Mr. President, I'm going to choke the economy to squeeze inflation out. It's the only way we can do it. It's going to be painful, and it's going to come in your election year. And he said, I don't want my legacy to be this high inflation. You take care of the economy, Mr. Volcker. I'll take care of the politics. Well, inflation did drop like a rock, but in the first 2 years of the Reagan administration, not in time to help us. And third was the Iranian Revolution and the hostage crisis. 444 humiliating days in which he decided not to use military action against Iran, except the rescue, for fear they would assassinate our hostages. He negotiated, and Khomeini simply wouldn't allow him to have a victory until after the election. All those hostages came back. President Reagan gave him Air Force One to greet them in Germany after they left Iran, but it came again too late. And that underscores a broader point. He planted many seeds that only flowered afterward, like the deployment of arms against the Soviet Union, which Reagan gets credit for, like deregulation, where the impact came only later, where the environment, where people saw it only after he left office, like energy, where we are now the biggest producer of oil and natural gas and the second largest producer of solar panels. That's because of Jimmy Carter. He started the solar renewable revolution. He put a White House, on top of his White House, he put a solar panel symbolically. And he deregulated natural gas and crude oil, so we got more production. Now, again, the greatest producers in the world. These all matured after he was left office, and so he didn't get credit for it in the election.
It's genuinely fascinating, and thank you so much for talking us through that and recounting, indeed, a number of fascinating anecdotes. Thank you. That's Ambassador Stuart Eizenstadt, who was Jimmy Carter's domestic policy director throughout his term of office and has written a biography of his White House years.